I am speaking with U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, who is at home and has been isolating himself. Senator, good to see you, and maybe you can refresh our viewers real quick why you are self-isolating.
Yeah, sure, Rob. Thanks for having me. The negotiations, the final negotiations over the legislation that we passed just a week ago Friday were quite intense. There were a lot of us in small conference rooms, and, that's obviously a situation where social distancing was not feasible. And I have no symptoms of anything whatsoever, but I thought out of an abundance of caution, I ought to just isolate myself for the 2-week period that's recommended. Mercifully, I am coming close to the end of that period. I still feel great, but I'll wait this out in my basement. I know other people have it a lot worse, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah, you have everybody wearing masks, and now all of a sudden it seems like many experts are coming around to that. You must be gratified, although if you could coax the president himself to wear one, that might be a trick.
Yeah, that could be harder, but it is a good thing, I think. I've been persuaded, I was some time ago, by the data and the experience of countries where mask use is common. I should point out a couple of things, Rob. First of all, I'm not talking about the N95 masks, the very high-grade, high-quality masks. We need to save those for the healthcare providers who are dealing with infected people every day. What I am talking about are just homemade masks. They could be store-bought. They could be just a scarf or a bandana. It's just some kind of physical barrier that will reduce the spray of the tiny droplets that leave our mouths and nose when we just talk and breathe. Those droplets, if you are carrying the virus, can transmit the virus to someone else. So the idea is my mask helps to protect you, your mask helps to protect me. And if we're all wearing masks when we're interacting with people in public, and by all means, we need to still keep our 6-foot distance and observe the restrictions on gatherings that are in place. But the masks will help slow the rate of transmission, and that's a really good thing.
All right. I want to ask you about that stimulus bill in a sec, but first a couple of quick questions about the overall federal response to this. The Surgeon General said over the weekend we're bracing for a really bad week, and a number of the governors, as you know, have been complaining about supplies to them and competing with each other to get supplies, and complaining that there hasn't been a coordinated federal response from the top on down to the states. Are those governors wrong, or do they have a point?
I think it's mixed. The truth is our healthcare system was not designed to accommodate the kind of surge that some have been forecasting. You can see the challenges in New York City, but yet also you can see what's happened in New York City. The temporary hospitals that were erected almost overnight in Central Park, the conversion of the Jacob Javits Center to be able to accommodate many hundreds of people, a naval ship that is a floating hospital. So look, we're struggling to get all of the resources exactly where they're most needed at any point in time, but there's been a tremendous response by the private sector, a tremendous scaling up of the production of masks and personal protective equipment. I am very impressed and actually very optimistic about the progress being made on therapeutic drugs. I'm very optimistic that we'll have a vaccine much sooner than we've ever been able to develop a vaccine before, although that still does take some time before it's readily available. So, look, this is an unprecedented pandemic. The last time anything like this happened was 100 years ago, literally, and obviously the changes in technology make this a totally different time. So we've all been struggling to cope with this, but I think there's been a lot of progress made. The federal government has provided a tremendous amount of resources, and we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this, I think, maybe sooner than people originally thought.
Well, if I may, let me just press on that just a little bit.
Sure.
There have been a lot of stories over the weekend of an investigative nature saying that the federal government basically lost 2 months from mid-January to mid-March getting on this, and that's really exacerbated our predicament. So I'm wondering what you think of that and how you would grade the government's response, and Americans have a right to be perturbed when they hear about that stuff.
Well, look, there'll be plenty of time to go back and do a thorough postmortem. Right now, I'm focused on what we need to do right now, and that's changing on a daily basis, sometimes hourly, whether it's making sure that our hospital systems can provide can manufacture their own test kits and have the materials to implement those tests, whether it's getting PPE equipment to the people who need it, making sure the FDA is providing the most expedited possible authorization for the use of medicines. Look, I don't think in early January there were many people anywhere in the world who really understood the nature of this, and our challenge was compounded by inaccurate information that was propagated by the Chinese government. So, if we could go back and do it all over again, would we do things differently? I'm sure we all would. But I think the response has been a whole of government response. There's been tremendous resources. There is extensive communication and coordination back and forth with the administration. I've spoken with the president and other members of his team. I know governors have a direct line to the president and his advisors. So I think we're doing reasonably well under the circumstance at this point.
On the financial matters, they are in your wheelhouse. You passed this huge bill.
Right.
Some are saying that we may need to go farther than that, though. What do you think about that?
Well, let's see. That's possible. First of all, the legislation that we passed was so huge, so sweeping, and done so quickly that I can guarantee you there are flaws, there are errors, there are unanticipated consequences. And so we're going to want to go back and clean up some of those things, deal with some of those unanticipated consequences. It's entirely possible that some categories will need replenishing. So, for instance, the $350 billion that the federal government is going to provide to small businesses to maintain their payrolls, these are loans that do not have to be repaid as long as the business retains its workforce. So really, it's the federal government offering to pick up the payroll expense of small businesses all across America. That's up to employers of 500 people, so not just tiny businesses. So might we need to replenish some of these and make some tweaks? Yeah, I think that's quite likely. But I do think it's a little too early to know exactly what that needs to look like, and it's too early to decide about some other sweeping categories.
Some people have said they think unemployment could hit 30%. That sounds like worse than recession, but more like a depression sort of word. Are you confident we'll avoid that kind of thing?
Rob, I don't know quite how bad that number is going to get. It's going to become very, very large when you have the government shut down the economy and make it impermissible to open business doors, impermissible to go to work. Well, you're going to have an awful lot of people who are unemployed. My hope is, number one, we've got much more generous unemployment benefits than ever before, and that's going to help people get through this. Number two, we've got checks going out from the government to everybody. The payments, the wire transfers will start occurring this week, and they're very substantial, as you know, $1,200 per person, $2,400 for a married couple, additional $500 per dependent child. So really, for many people, it'll be $2,000, $3,000. That's a lot of direct aid. That will help people get through a period where they might be unemployed. And it's also really important that we figure out, how do we resume business? How do people go back to work? How do we reopen the economy? Not all at once, not in all places, but at least gradually, and gradually where we can do so safely. We need to be having that conversation now.
During the coronavirus briefing at the White House over the weekend, they said Pennsylvania was likely to be a key hot spot that's coming up here after New York. And I wonder, based on what you're hearing, how worried should Pennsylvanians be?
Well, look, I think we've got to be very, very careful, but we did engage in pretty major social distancing relatively early. I think there's reason to believe that our hospitals have the capacity to deal with the surge that might well be coming in this next week or two. So we should be concerned. We should be careful. We should continue the distancing. We should wear masks in public. We should do all the hand washing and all of the other measures that we know are important in this. And if we do that, then I think the peak will not be as severe as it might have been. And I do feel cautiously optimistic that our healthcare systems are prepared for what's likely coming.
All right, just one more thing real quickly. As you sit isolated in your basement, what gives you hope?
Oh, I'm very, very hopeful. The response of the American people has been amazing. The heroism of the healthcare providers who are going into work, despite the personal risk that they take, is extremely encouraging. The daily conversations I have with individuals and businesses who are developing new tests, new therapies, new vaccines. The progress on this front has been absolutely breathtaking. Whole industries that are beginning to manufacture ventilators and personal protective equipment when this is not their normal business. The response has been tremendous, and it is really going to help us get through this.
All right. Senator Pat Toomey, thanks for your time. My best to Chris, and stay safe.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Same to you.